A very good morning to all of you. Today we shall take up the poem A Zam of Life, written by H.W. Longfellow. Before we move for the explanation of the poem, let us know a little bit about the poet. H.W. Longfellow, Henry Wordsworth Longfellow, was born in 1807 and died in 1882. He was a Harvard scholar versed in several European languages. He was heavily influenced by Romanticism and made a name as a poet and novelist with works like Hypersion, poems on slavery, and the Song of Hiawatha. He was also known for his translation of Dante's The Divine Comedy. Other successful works were The Courtship of Miles Standish and other poems. Let us now begin with the explanation of the poem. In the very first stanza, the poet says, "Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. For the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem." The poem begins in an imperative manner with the verb tell. In the very first sentence, the poet strikes a positive keynote. It also indicates that the poet is going to give us some instructions on what this life actually is and how we should take it. The poet asks us not to tell him in a sorrowful verses that life is a hollow and meaningless dream. Here, Longfellow slams the pessimist who sings melancholy songs, writes sad poems, or thinks that nothing can be achieved in this life. According to the poet, a person who spends all his time sleeping is already dead. Such worthless examples of life often misguide others, and he assures that life is not so shady or worthless as it looks like, or it has much more potential than what we think of. In the lines that continue, the poet says, "Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul." In the second stanza, the poet begins with the line, "Life is real, life is earnest." This also conveys the poet's positive attitude towards life. According to him, life is real and serious. It's not baseless or useless. So we should not take this life lightly. According to him, grave is not the ultimate goal of our life. Life does not end with death. He wants to indicate that our works remain in this world even after our death. He thinks, "Thus thou art, to dust returnest." Though we are made of this dust, and one day we shall return back to this dust after death. But this was only spoken about the body, which is not applicable to the soul. So the poet makes it clear that he believes in the existence of soul even after death. The poet further comprehends his optimistic attitude towards life and says, "Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow finds us farther than today." The third stanza of the poem Psalm of Life is about the ideal way of living. The poet suggests that neither enjoyment nor sorrow should be our ultimate aim or way of leading our life. He means to say that in an ideal life, we should have a balance of enjoyment as well as of grief. The most important thing is to work and to work sincerely so that we can always be a better learned, better skilled, and better mannered human being with every passing day. In the poem, The poet does not want us to waste even a single day. He wants that we should crave for going forward and find our own selves farther each day in journey of life. The poet says, art is long and time is fleeting. In our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the fourth stanza, the poet talks about our responsibilities in this life and about the work that has been assigned to us by the Almighty. He says, art is long and time is fleeting, which means that the work given to us is vast and time consuming. But the time is running fast every moment. The poet then says that though our hearts are brave and stout at times, but we fear death, and our heart beats when we realize that death is certain and is coming our way bit by bit. H. W. Longfellow compares this situation of our hearts to the beating of cloth drums at the funeral marches. He means to say that we should utilize our limited time span to the fullest instead of wasting our time in the thought about the inevitable death. In the next stanza, the poet talks about our existence in this world. He says, in the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb driven cattle, be a hero in the strife. In the next stanza, the poet compares this world to a vast battlefield where we human beings camp temporarily in order to fight the battle of our life. Thus, the human beings are compared with the troops. The poet further tells us to be a hero in this battle of life and to fight this out bravely and finally win it. In other words, he wishes us to be successful in our life by following the right way of life. He does not want to see us like those dumb driven cattle who are hushed to other places by people who do not have any particular goal or direction in their life. In the next verse, the poet tries to tell us to avoid temptations in our life. He says, trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act, act in the living present, heart within and God's overhead. In the sixth stanza of the poem, the poet reminds us of a very popular quote. Learn from the past, live in the present, and hope for the future. But here, the poet instructs us not to trust the future, however pleasant it may seem, because we often get carried away by the happy dreams about our future and forget to act in the present. He also tells us to forget the past events as they are dead, they are gone, and they should not haunt us anymore or affect our present action. He says it is must that we must act in the present, that is, in the living present. We must follow our hearts and keep faith in the God who resides above us, who would surely one day reward us for our hard work. The poet further says, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sand of time. In the seventh stanza of the poem, the poet reminds us about the lives of many great and successful men and tells us that we too can achieve these heights if we wish and strive for them. And if we can do that, we would be living forever in this world through our work in the hearts of the people. The poet compares this immortality to leaving footprints on the sand of time. In other words, we may not live here forever in this world, but we can live in the hearts of people through the good deeds that we do, as these good deeds would turn out to be a source of inspiration for the coming generations. The poet continues to say, footprints that perhaps another, sailing over life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing shall take heart again. In the second last stanza of the poem, the poet continues with the same theme of leaving a footprint in order to inspire others to follow. He compares a dejected and wrecked person with a hopeless, shipwrecked man sailing over the large sea of life. He says, a person who has become hopeless in his life can find a way out by the examples set by us and can gain courage and hope to move ahead in his life. In the final verse, the poet says, let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. In the final four lines of the poem, A Psalm of Life, the poet H.W. Longfellow asks us to be up at once and start working. The poet tells us not to mind the consequences or to make our mind prepared for any fate. He tells us that we must carry on, reaching great heights, and not waiting or leaving anything left unturned. We must learn to labor in our life, to work hard, and to act wisely. And along with all this, we must also learn to wait patiently for the rewards from the Almighty. So, children, while reading this poem, we realize how inspiring and motivating it is. The poet conveys his message throughout the poem, but the few beginning and ending lines are more than enough to convey his message. He says, we should not spend our priceless moments sitting idly and doing nothing. Rather, we have to work hard towards reaching our goals and to make the most out of this short life. I hope you will follow this in your life as well. Thank you and have a nice day.